way. Get a good job with more pay than you're okay. Money, it's a gas. Grab that cash with both hands, then make a stash.
Good morning. Hey, give yourselves a great big hand for being here on the first nice day in a long time. Come on now, you're clapping for yourself. I expect better than that. That's good. That's good. Hey, my name is Ryan Howell, and I'm the lead pastor here at Crossroads Church. My pronouns are he, him, and I do recognize that as a white heterosexual Christian man, I hit the privilege jackpot in America. And what that means, and I think there is some confusion around this word privilege, because we use it differently. So sometimes people use the word privilege. They think, oh, I grew up in privilege, or they grew up privileged, meaning they had a lot of resources and income. But when I use the word privilege, I mean it in a maybe a little bit more technical sense that, yep, I had to work hard in my life, but I didn't have to work harder because of my skin color. I didn't have to work harder because of my gender or my sexuality. And that's what privilege is when you live in certain spaces. And there's lots of types of privilege. And Jimmy preached already, so I feel like we should just receive the offering and go home. But absolutely. But I think it's important that we kind of honor more so and speak out loud the truth of some of these things that we live into as peacemakers who are following the peacemaking path of Jesus. And so I agree and just say amen to what Jimmy said. And I think it's important that every week as we gather, we don't gather in a bubble and we don't pretend that everything is okay, but that we recognize we're called as followers of Jesus to walk a peacemaking path. That means we have to recognize and identify the things that we have been a part of, whether we knew it or didn't know it, or that live inside of us. And so I, too, am extraordinarily grateful to be here at this moment in this time with you all and to create a space where we can gather together. But it is that time for us to play, everybody's favorite game. And what is that? I love it. That's very, very good. Okay, so today I believe we want to welcome Jessica. Where is Jessica? Who's playing? Jessica, come on up. Come on down, Jessica. All right. Now, Jessica, here we go. First thing you have to do is spin to figure out how much of Ryan's money you're playing for today. Give it a good spin. And then we'll turn it around so everybody can see with great anticipation how much money you're playing for. $20.
It's always $20.
All right, but here's what I'm going to do for you today. We have 3 questions today. So I'm going to allow you to play for $60 today.
Okay.
All right, so each question will be worth $20. And you can phone a friend. Okay? All right. So we'll draw your attention up to the screen here, and we'll see. Here's our first question. Our first question is here. Can we get it up on the screen here for us? There it is. Okay, no, there's the answer. Okay, so you just won. You just won $20. All right, you just won $20. I think that's my fault. Here's the deal. Just so you all know up in the booth, like the back screen is a little messed up, like the bottom that should be telling me next still says, welcome to Crossroads, introduce yourself and your role. So I don't know what's going on there. So we'll see what happens. Okay, but here we go. Which of these, this is the second question. You got $20 for free. Man, alive. I have to work for this money, like it doesn't fall out of trees. We're just throwing it away. Okay, I'm not throwing it away on you. I didn't mean it that way. Okay, here we go. Which of these categories received the most charitable dollars in 2021? That was what we found on the internet, was 2021. Okay. All right? Is it human resources, religion, education, or grant-making foundations? What do you think?
Religion.
Very good. The answer is religion. You're up to $40. $40.
All right. I want 60.
Man alive. Okay.
Okay.
Hopefully we got a harder question for you here. Okay, here we go. Oh my gosh, it's the easy one. Okay. Traditionally, when is Giving Tuesday? The first Tuesday after Christmas, the first Tuesday of February, the first Tuesday after Memorial Day, or the first Tuesday after Thanksgiving?
Be the first Tuesday after Thanksgiving.
The first Tuesday after Thanksgiving. You are correct. You have won Ryan's money. Just take it all, forget it. Just go have lunch. Give it up for Jessica. I love it. Well, how many of y'all like to give? I love to give. I don't like it taken from me, but you know. Today we're going to talk about generosity, and really today is not about getting you to make a donation, okay? That's not the goal of today. Everybody just go, whew. Because here's the deal. I know you came in here today, and if you're a part of our church, you already planned and figured out if you were going to make a financial gift like you do every week or whatever. So this is not what today is about. Today is not about presenting you with a spirituality of generosity where if you give, God will give you more. Okay, I don't believe in that nonsense. I think that is used to manipulate people, all that good stuff. Today is about something much deeper, okay? So everybody can relax and we can enjoy this conversation about generosity in our finances because I'm not in the middle, well, we are in the middle of a fundraiser. But we've already talked to you about giving, and most of you have already made your commitments to that, okay? So everybody just take a nice deep breath. Nobody's going to ask you to hand over your credit card information. I mean, you can, but nobody's going to ask you to do that today, okay? Now, I'm going to take you to a little dark place. I don't mean to, but I want to do it. I want you to imagine right now that you get to attend your own funeral, okay? And the people that know you the best, they've gathered there. There's for whatever reason, there's potato salad and potluck out in the foyer because that's what you do at funerals. It's very strange. And, it's that time of the funeral where people come forward and they start to say things about you, okay? How many of you, raise your hand up nice and high, want people to say nice things about you? Nice things about you. Good. That you want them to say, Bob was just a kind person. Love it. You want them to say, Sally, boy, she was generous, right? You want them to say all kinds of nice things. Now, how many of you raise up nice and I want them to say, Tony was just greedy. Tony was just greedy. Anybody? Tony was just, every little penny he got, he just saved it away and could have helped a lot of people, but the good thing is he died with a whole bunch of money. Right? No, we don't want to do that, right? Most of us want to be generous people, right? If we're honest, we want people to think of us as generous. We want people to think of us as kind. But if we're even more honest, generosity and kindness, right, is kind of like the old saying, like everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die, right? We want to be thought of as these things, but the truth is they're difficult, right? And there are barriers that exist in our lives that keep us from generosity. Now, over this series, we've been talking about how do we be peacemakers in our finances, and how do we bring our values that we talk about here a lot and that we try to instill in us as an organization, but then also as us as individuals. So we've talked about wisdom and inclusion and fun. Last week, we talked about go spend it all. How many of you rang up the credit card bills after last week's mess? No, you didn't do that. I know you didn't. But here's the thing, there are barriers in our lives to being what we want to be. Otherwise, it would be easy, right? Otherwise, everybody would be generous. There would be no poverty if it were easy, right? We wouldn't think about cutting aid if it were easy to be considered generous, right? So there are barriers that exist in our lives, and I want to talk about a few of those. So one of the barriers that can hinder us from being generous would be debt, right? We can carry debt in our lives. And debt can be a barrier to generosity because debt kind of gets into our lives and it kind of chokes us out a little bit, right? And it creates a sense of constrainment, right? We are overstretched. And so we're unable to be generous because we have a lot of obligations, right? Now, and there's good debt and there's bad debt. So this isn't a message. We're not talking about debt, but I'm just saying that how many of y'all would agree? Like, is that, I'm not trying to blow your mind here. Yeah. You should say duh after 90% of everything I say in my life, okay? Learning is just being reminded of what you already know, okay? And I just try to do it in a song and dance, okay? That's all I'm trying to do up here. So debt is a barrier, and it means why we have to act wisely when we think about debt and when we incorporate debt into our life. Sometimes, debt happens as a matter of emergency. Sometimes debt happens as a matter of like pain in our lives, and so we go and we spend and we don't mean. But debt can hinder us from being generous. Another thing that can hinder us from being generous is fear. Fear is a barrier in our lives. Right, we get afraid of being taken advantage of. How many of you have ever experienced? How many of you have ever felt like you've been taken advantage of financially, right? I mean, that's just the truth of it. We have this fear that, does this person really have a need? Maybe they asked us for some money. Maybe you have a family member and they told you they were struggling. You gave them some money and the next day you saw them in new jeans and you were like, oh, honey, what? Right, because nothing will make you more judgmental than giving somebody money that you think is suffering, and then you will judge how they live their life afterwards, right? They're like, I can't believe you were getting a supersized McDonald's when you just told me you couldn't, right? So maybe you've given something and it turned out to be wasteful or you were manipulated, and so we have this like fear that sits and we become hesitant to give again, right? And so that can like hinder our generosity. This is truth. Like some of us have bad experiences with giving to organizations, right? Right? And maybe you've participated at times in an organization, a church, a nonprofit, and you gave, and then all of a sudden you learned that the money wasn't used the way you thought it was going to be used. Or maybe you learned that there was a problem and you just felt used, right? I remember when I was a young, I'm not a young pastor anymore. I try to imagine I am, but I'm really not. I got a birthday coming up. And so I'm like definitely like, somebody told me that I crossed like mid. I don't know what that is, but I'm over it, I guess. But when I was a young pastor in Maine, I just started at this church, and all of a sudden this group of about 20 people showed up. And it was really interesting. They just all came together. And that's not good, right? In my business, when 20 people show up together that aren't related, you're like, oh no, something happened somewhere. And sure enough, one of the ringleaders, I don't know what to call it, one of the leaders of the group, they invited me to come over to their house for coffee to kind of hear their story. And so I go over there and I remember, I was just like, I had been at this church now for maybe like 2-3 months, first time ever being a lead pastor. And so, you know everything, all right? So we're sitting down and they start just telling me like their journey as a group of people, and they had come from this other church, and really at the heart of what they were struggling with was they had just been really manipulated, and they gave and they gave and they gave, and people were they gave like heirlooms, and I heard all these stories of like grandmother's rings that were given and to this project, and then they found out that all the church property was like in the pastor's name, which I thought was a pretty good idea. I'm just kidding. Just joking. That's a joke. And they just started sharing one story after another about how they just felt like they had been taken advantage of. And this is a common story. And I remember having to tell these folks, I was like, well, listen, like, here's the deal. Like, nobody in this group is allowed to give to our church for 6 months at least. Like, you give someplace else, don't stop giving. Like, you need to be generous, but don't give. Like, you need to heal. And like, because that can clog up generosity when you go through an experience like that, right? And I felt like I was pretty wise in that moment. I thought, hey, I did well. I said, don't give, just heal. But I said, give to something else. Give to something you value. And then as you get familiar, then you can start to support your church. That's wonderful, right? But we go through those experiences, and that can like clog up our generosity. And it was important for me to say to them, you got to continue to give, because without a spirit of generosity, we become people who are cold and indifferent to the problems in our world. And we become trapped by a very limited perspective. And that limited perspective usually doesn't go beyond our need, beyond our problems. And when we find ourselves like hindered from generosity, when we find ourselves holding back, right, from meeting the needs of others because of these bad experiences, because of fear, all of a sudden our perspective becomes very small. And we're no longer concerned, and our hearts are no longer broken by the things that break the heart of God. And that's why it's super important that we recognize this value of generosity is not just something we do as an afterthought, right? But it's something that we are very intentional about. And Scripture offers us a lot of wisdom on this. The Apostle Paul, when he's writing to one of the churches that he had started, we have this letter, 2 Corinthians. And in 2 Corinthians, he's writing to this church because what Paul is doing at this time is he's collecting an offering for the church in Jerusalem that's suffering. And so Paul knew that there was a problem in Jerusalem, that there was a lot of suffering going on. And so he was asking all of the communities that he had founded to participate in sending an offering to help them. Now, you got to remember, these folks were they were already still giving to the temple. They were already giving their tithe. This was like Paul's Peace is Worth It campaign, right? And he's talking about it. And as he's encouraging the Corinthians, this is what he says. He says, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Now, each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Let that sit in for a second while I take a drink. Now, I love this passage because I think it's truth. I think there's wisdom in it. I think it's been used to manipulate people to give beyond what they should or anything like that. But I love it because what it's saying is that universally, giving, generosity is transformative. It changes us. I love that it says whoever sows. It's not just the wealthy that sow or the poor that sow. It's whoever, anybody. It's not just the Christians or the Muslims or the Hindus or the atheists. Whoever sows, right? And as we do this, the idea is everybody can give. Everybody can give in such a way that changes you. And here's what's fascinating. I do believe this. I believe that giving changes us in ways that receiving never can. You know, I was having a conversation with my youngest this week, and somehow we started to have like a deep conversation. We have one of these like every 7 years, right? So, I mean... And we're talking about giving and being generous. And I shared with them, I said, listen, I really do believe that there's something about giving that changes who we are. And we talked about character, right? That here's the thing, like here's what's powerful. Like giving builds and adds character. Receiving just, it takes the character that you have and it makes it bigger. So like if you have a grateful spirit and you receive, you're going to show gratitude if that's your character, right? So receiving exposes your character. If you have selfish character and you receive, you're going to think you deserve more. There's something about receiving that just magnifies our character. But what's powerful about giving is it creates character. And we talked about this idea that when I've had to learn, I said, I've had to learn that I don't ever get angry about what a person does once the gift is given. Like once I set in my mind to give, then I just have to release it. And I can't like hold on to that. I can't say, well, this is how they should use it, or this is what they should, or how could they, right? Because I'm actually growing in my character. I'm not simply saying, I just want to be who I am. I want to actually grow as an individual, and I want to release. And that's the beauty of like when you sow generously, right? Your character grows. You see the world in a bigger light. When we receive, there's power, undoubtedly, and power can shape our character, but I don't know that receiving builds character. I don't know that it grows our character. Proverbs 11:25. Now remember about the book of Proverbs. Like some people mistake Proverbs for promises, right? The book is not called Promises 11:25, okay? And you got to remember that the book of Proverbs comes out of a very, very like wealthy, privileged class. So the writer of Proverbs is writing primarily to people who have resources. And you have to understand that this is not how it works. How many of y'all know that you know people who've worked really hard, but the system has been set up in such a way that just because you work hard doesn't mean you're going to advance? No? Right? It's why, I'm going to say it out loud, it's why the idea of a meritocracy is foolishness. It just doesn't exist. There's too many factors involved. So we have to remember that when Proverbs is written, it's saying this is generally how it works when all the stars are aligned, okay? So there's wisdom there for us in making wise choices, and I love it. But just remember, these aren't promises, okay? So in Proverbs chapter 11, 25, this is what it says. A generous person will prosper. A generous person will prosper, and whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. And I love this proverb because it's talking about a paradox that's found within generosity. And this paradox within generosity is that when we give, we are renewed. Right? That when we let things flow out of us, right? Maybe out of our abundance, maybe out of our intention, when we let our resources flow out of us, we actually find ourselves not more stressed, but less stressed. We find ourselves refreshed. We find ourselves thinking about money differently. Because that's what we're talking about. We can be generous with lots of stuff, but we're talking specifically about generosity with our finances in this series, right? And so it's interesting because generosity shifts that focus that we have that's generally inward, it shifts it outwards, and it teaches us this big idea of perspective, and we start to see beyond our own needs, and we are refreshed, right? It's why so oftentimes when we do these trips and we go and experience places like the Happy Givers in Puerto Rico, right? A lot of people go and their perspective changes because they've experienced the power of generosity. They've walked into a difficult space. They become more appreciative of what we have, which is fine. You've encountered God because when you are near the poor, when you are near the marginalized, when you are near the oppressed, you are the closest you will ever be to God. And so trips like that are powerful. And it shapes us. It changes our perspective. It's why we come back from those experiences, whether it's down the street to the community kitchen or whether it's down to Puerto Rico or Romania or wherever we might go. Like we come back refreshed, but also we come back broken. We come back with a different perspective. And it's a crazy paradox. And I want to encourage you to be careful. Don't equate the word prosperity with wealth. Prosperity is much bigger than that. Prosperity is about wholeness and peace and flourishing in every area of our lives. Any Star Trek fans here? To live long and prosper, right? I know a lot of people who have a lot of money and they're miserable. I would hardly call that prosperity. I know a lot of people who live at a very kind of, what we might say, use the word meager, but they're super happy, super generous, super content. That's prosperity. I always tell people I've worried a lot about money in my life, right? I've worried a lot about the money I need for my mortgage, the money I've needed for car payments at times, the money I needed to pay my school bills, the money I needed to pay for stuff for my kids, the money. I've worried a lot about the money. You know what money I've never worried about? It's the money I've given away. Never worried about that money. Never even thought about it afterwards. See, there's something about that that's prosperity. There's something about that says, I was able to participate in a miracle. I was able to participate in something in someone's life, a need that was met. I was able to participate in creating a healthy organization, to nonprofits that we've given to our churches. We've always given to our church, right? I mean, there's something powerful about that. And so prosperity is not simply, I get more money. And that's not it at all. I think it's about the way we look at our money and the way we think about it. And we no longer let our money control us and possess us. There's something very powerful about generosity. So here's what I don't want us to miss. That intentional generosity, as we think about our finances, is a universal pathway to all of human flourishing, right? Intentional generosity is a universal pathway to human flourishing. It's why every major religion in the world talks about giving alms. So every major religion in the world sets that aside. Like there's something powerful about this. Here's what happens. Like the giver flourishes emotionally, right? There's joy in giving. The giver flourishes financially because you find wisdom and temperance in giving. Here's why. Can I just tell you like why it works that you, it's just the craziest thing. When people start to give, it happens all the time. People tell me, I started to give and then all of a sudden I had more. Now, why is that? Well, because you've been intentional and you're thinking about it and you're not as foolish with your money. Like that's just the truth of it. It's the intentionality of it. You become a better steward, wise steward. The giver flourishes spiritually because generosity breaks the power of greed in our lives. You want to break the power of greed in your life, you got to give something away. There's no other way to do it. You got to give stuff away. I'm not talking about your kids, okay? That's a totally different issue. Some of you are like, oh man, I was going to grow a spirit of generosity. And the receiver also flourishes, right? The receiver flourishes emotionally because they find encouragement and hope in the gift. When you recognize a need in a friend or a neighbor or someone at work and you meet that need, you're encouraging them. The receiver flourishes financially because they find relief, a resource for a financial burden they might have had no idea what they were going to do. When you identify that single parent who's working and you go, oh, I can help with this, they flourish. The receiver can flourish spiritually because they experience the grace of God through your generosity. So how do you do this in your everyday normal life? How do we bring this value of generosity into our finances, into our financial? Well, I want to encourage you to create a wise and responsible plan for generosity. You got to have a plan. We could right now, like, I'm looking around the room and I know that I could just ask people to come up right now and you could say, yes, amen. Here's the plan that we put in place years ago. And here's what's happened in our lives. And you could, I'm hesitant to do that because it sounds like if-then spirituality, but it's just the law of sowing and reaping. It's wisdom, right? And part of a plan is this: decide what percentage you want to give away. Decide what percentage you want to give away. In our tradition, in the Christian tradition, you always hear this word tithing, this 10% idea. I think it's a good idea. You know, I don't think it's law. I don't think you have to give 10%, but I think it's a great goal to start with. 10%, it's been around for a couple thousand years. Not a bad idea. Let's just do that. Now, here's the thing though. Let me talk to some of you who've been giving 10% for like 40 years, and you're proud of that. I'm going to take a breath, right? We want to grow, okay? So just figure, okay, I want to give away 10%. Let's just say that's your goal. Maybe you're not doing that. You say, I want to give away 10%. Then you got to think about, where will I give it, okay? Where am I going to give it? And how will I give it? These are just plans. So you're just thinking through these plans, right? How will I give it? Okay, so you got to have a wise and responsible plan. There is such thing as irresponsible giving, right? I mean, you can't give to the point where you're not eating. You can't give to the point where you're not fulfilling your obligations, right? You have to be responsible with that. Now remember, when I'm talking about giving, I'm not talking about giving to Crossroads, all right? Are you hearing me? Are you hearing me? We're talking about generosity. Now, so create a plan, and then I want to encourage you, secondly, to think about how you give to three things. This is the way our family does it, so I just share it with you. It's like give to now, give to need, and give to next. How many of you have ever heard me say that before? You've been paying attention. Give to now, give to need, give to next. Now, as you think about this, I'm going to say something that you've probably never heard someone in my position ever say to you, okay? If you determine you're going to give 10% of your income away, do not give every penny of that 10% to your church or to an organization. Whew. I thought I'd get an amen on that one from somebody. If you're just going to give 10%, okay, if that's your goal, do not give it all away. You should have margin in your giving so that when you encounter someone in need, you can financially help them. Does that make sense? Like, you should do that. So let's say you make $1 million a year. How many of you, no, I'm just kidding. I'd be looking too. I'd be like, oh, no, I know you're giving. You don't make no $1 million a year. No, listen, here's the deal. Like, let's imagine for round numbers, you make $1 million a year and you say, I'm going to give $100,000 away so I will suffer and live on $900,000, which would not be generous, by the way. That would be minimal standard of giving, but okay. So you say, I'm going to give $100,000 away. I would encourage that person to say, hey, you got to figure out, like, how much of that 10% you're going to give away to organizations that you love. I hope, as a pastor, I hope that your church is on that top of the list because we don't exist without that. But let's say you say, I'm going to give 99% to the church. And I'm going to give, no, you say, I'm going to give whatever. But you want to keep a little giving account, a little envelope so that when you're at work And when you're in your neighborhood and you hear about a need, you can joyfully meet that need. And when somebody is blown away by that, because who does that, you get to say, well, I live my life by a peacemaking rule of life. And part of that is to be generous. And, my pastor told me, don't give everything to the church so that I could help meet a need. Like, what pastor is that? I want his autograph or her autograph. But I really do believe that. I think you should. Now, if I'm being honest, I think give 10% of the church and then give more. But you got to start, whatever that is, okay? Now, here's the give to now. So now is sustaining what blesses you, okay, what encourages you. So are there things in your life that are important to you? You give to that. So for Wendy and I in our life, we think of now as our church, right? So we give to now, the general fund. This is important for us, what we're doing here. And we have some organizations that we know, like what their work is doing is important to us, and it encourages us to know that it's happening. So we give to those things. That's now. The things that are happening in the space right now, it just sustains the status quo, basically, right? Just sustains the status quo. Makes sure that the present work is going to continue on, right? So maybe you give regularly to Crossroads. Maybe you support an ongoing work. You have a family member who's doing nonprofit work, whatever it might be. And then we want to give to need, right? So we want to answer the acute needs that are in our world, okay? And so for us as a family, we give primarily the majority of our need money goes to our Partners in Hope strategy, which funds the staff member at our church who oversees the grants and the programs and all of those things that go out of our church for the most part, programs that are meeting acute needs in our community, Partners in Hope. And they're doing great work. And we talked about a partner that Sandy's there right now in Africa with our partner. And we have a partner in Puerto Rico and in Romania, and we have partners here in Loveland, right? And they organize, and our Partners in Hope ministry organizes us to volunteer so that we can support the Salvation Army as a partner. We ring the bell every year. So we primarily give that. Now, I think that's wonderful because I don't have to vet every little thing, right? It's kind of like a mutual fund for good deeds, right? It's like my eternal mutual fund. That's where we invest that in. So giving to those people, those organizations, that's kind of what Partners in Hope is around here. And then next, right, is giving to those opportunities to grow and to build good things. What is next? What doesn't exist now that won't exist if there's no generosity towards that? And really the truth behind, at our church, like the next idea is Peace is Worth It. The vision behind our annual Peace is Worth It initiative is to give to new things. And the truth is we're just still recovering and still in this rebuilding mode and still fighting Christian nationalism and dealing with a lot of things. So our Peace is Worth It is about, what are we going to do next here? But it's really about this idea of giving to future vision, right? That legacy giving. What's next? Where are we going? And so that's how we think about it. And I would encourage you to think in your own way. Like whatever you're going to set aside to give, think about in those areas. What blesses you? What encourages you? Right? Where are there acute needs? Where are you serving the poor and the marginalized specifically? And then where are you supporting what's next in those things that are powerful and that are important for you? And I think that develops a great portfolio of giving, right? And I do want to say this, I think there's something really powerful about planned giving, not just like what we're talking about now, but planned giving beyond our lives. Because planned giving, it allows our generosity and our generous spirit to continue beyond us. And I think that's an important part of this too, that we should all be thinking about is like, if we're generous, if we're giving to organizations that are relying on those donations, like how can you, as a legacy of your life, make sure that goes on? And planned giving is one of those things to do and to build into your generosity plan. And then finally, I want to encourage you with this. Please don't give beyond your joy. Don't give beyond your joy. If you start to give beyond your joy, then you're moving out of the realm, I think, of healthy giving. Now, you can find joy in sacrifice, don't get me wrong, right? I think that happens. It doesn't mean that at times, like right now, our family, we're in a space where like we're giving up some things because of the Peace is Worth It initiative, right? I mean, so there's a quote unquote sacrifice, which let's be honest, I mean, I'm sacrificing a little retirement, a lot of retirement, but that's okay. But the idea is I can find joy in that and trust in like, this is really worth it for me, for our family. So it's not to say that there aren't moments where we make decisions where we go, yeah, there's sacrifice involved, but there can be joy in that. But when it crosses over into this idea of, now I'm making this commitment and I'm starting to get bitter, right? I'm starting to feel like, gosh, well, just stop. Like that's where it ends, right? Where your joy, and just trust that your joy can grow and build over time. You're where you are in your generosity, right? Your generosity might be like, I'm gonna give 1%. I haven't been intentionally giving to anything anywhere, so I'm gonna give 1%. I'm gonna start there. And that's where my joy is found. Great. That's wonderful. And here's the other thing too, like if you're giving and it's not bringing you joy, it's just like routine, maybe you need to think about that. Maybe you need to find some joy in going a little nuts and finding another organization to give a little bit to or whatever it might be. I think that generosity should be a little thrilling, just a little bit, right? Not crazy, but just a little thrilling in our lives. So what this really means is like, don't make a commitment. Don't give in such a way that it creates bitterness or obligation in your heart. Like make a commitment that you're joyfully excited to fulfill, that you're looking for opportunities. Right? Sometimes around here we use this word pledge. We talk about like pieces worth it, just making kind of a giving commitment. And a lot of times what that means is to say, well, like, I'm going to keep my eyes open for where the universe brings resources for me to be able to give this, right? And it's not that I'm going to sacrifice my children's education. Not that I'm going to sacrifice, eating or paying the mortgage or anything like that. It's just that I'm going to live open-heartedly. I'm going to live with eyes open, trusting that if I do that, there'll come opportunities, right? And so you can do that with anything that you're giving, right? And I don't think it takes much for us to answer this next question. Like when I ask this question every week, how does this make me a better person, the world a better place? I feel like I could just skip these fill-ins, right? I mean, I think we could imagine what the world would be like if our nations were generous. I think we could imagine, I mean, no joke, like I think we could imagine a world where poverty doesn't exist, where children are not dying needlessly. I mean, I heard a statistic the other day that because of this, I mean, this is just the power of generosity to heal, right? Because of some of the orders and what stopped with, in parts of the world, we were supporting AIDS medicine. And since that order, and this was like a week ago when I read this, since that order, 300 babies were now born with HIV that wouldn't have been born with HIV. 300 babies, because we signed a piece of paper, are now born with HIV that would not have been. Imagine if we were generous. Right? Imagine if we actually saw the world through the lens of Jesus and peacemaking. Like I can see that world. I can see that world where there is no sickness, there is no disease, there is no poverty. Unfortunately, we sit sometimes in a theology that is expecting Jesus to come return on clouds and make it all happen for us. And I don't know where in the history of the church we ever think that's going to happen. Like the opportunity is ours as a church, as individuals, to be that. But I do think generosity expands our capacity and it grows us in 3 areas. It grows our love, our ability to love. When our perspective grows, we can love. We can really see needs. Our perspective on what love is grows. I know that's been my life. What it really means to love people has just grown. It's just grown and grown and grown, and generosity does that. I think that when we give, it requires that we are trustful of people, that we're filled with hope for people. It shows our care for others, and those are all facets of love. And then it grows our perspective and our capacity to be wise stewards. I do believe in this principle that we are stewarding what the universe places in front of us, right? That our resources are not just meant for me, but are meant for the common good. And so it grows our ability to steward. And I just think it's a universal law. I think it's a spiritual law that the better and the wiser of a steward I am, the more opportunities I have to steward. Right? The more I can be a responsible, wise steward of the things that I have been granted through privilege. I do not call it a blessing of God necessarily, but through whatever means, how do I then turn around and use those for the common good? Right? And so I can be a better steward. I have to, when stewards are disciplined, they're responsible, right? Stewards have a perspective that goes beyond just themselves, right? That's powerful. And our perspective and capacity to impact the world will grow beyond our lifetime. The more generous we become, the more we think about this, we can actually have a lasting, eternal impact with our giving. You know, in organizations that you love, endowments and trusts are game changers for their ability to do their work in perpetuity, right? And so I want to encourage you to think about that. Like when you have the opportunity to give to an organization or to something you love and they have a trust, they have a legacy fund, right? Like set aside a portion of your giving to that fund because it will go on beyond you. And just as a leader of a nonprofit, the church is a nonprofit, I've led other nonprofits, like those are amazing and they help sustain the missional work that you believe in beyond your lifetime, right? I have a friend, Jeff, who was the executive director of a ministry called Emmanuel Gospel Center in Boston, and they worked with all different types of churches in the city, bringing them together. A really great ministry, been around for a long time. And one of his goals when as he was retiring was he wanted to leave the Gospel Center really with an endowment. He wanted to get rid of their debt, wanted them to have an endowment. And he was telling me this was like 3 years before he was going to retire. And like the center had like $3 million in debt. And I mean, it was just like, you're crazy, Jeff. How are you going to do this? And he was just super creative. And at the end of the day, like he retired this last year and in like a matter of 3 years, ended up with the endowment, the goal was met, they moved some of their ministry around, made it more nimble, flexible for the city, and like bam, there they were. And it's beautiful because the Gospel Center is going to be able to do work for years and years and years and years and years. And that's the power of like intentional generosity and planning. And that's quite honestly, it's one of my goals. I've said this to our council at times. I've said this to others. Like one of my goals for Crossroads Church when I retire, if you'll have me that long. And I know that. I've got my fingers crossed. But my goal is that when I retire, that Crossroads has a peacemaking endowment that can help continue to fund the work of this church for decades and decades and decades and can present a picture of the gospel that is beautiful, that is oftentimes not well funded because it's not manipulative. And that's kind of my heart, is that as a church, as we kind of come through our season of crisis and as we're thinking about the future, we're actually thinking about 100 years from now, not just 5 years from now. But how can we set this place up so that generations in Loveland and Fort Collins and around the world can be recipients of a healthy spirituality that's inclusive, that's wise, that's generous, right? That's not just about coming, and we come and are encouraged, absolutely, but we're actually impacting the world. So we're going to have a few minutes for communion here today. What's God inviting you into is the question I ask at this moment. Maybe I hope that every person in here, that all of us will do this one thing this week. I hope that this week we'll figure out some way that we could take $5, $10, $20, $100, whatever it might be. I already did mine. I gave away $100, in case you didn't count, there were 520s in there, Jess, as lunch right there. I just gave up my crown in heaven. I told everybody, right hand and left hand, you're not supposed to know. I want to encourage you to give this a try. Oh gosh, I'm going to say this. Jimmy's he's going to be mad at me. Like if you're getting ready to give in the offering today, but you don't have anything left over to give to someone outside of here, then I want you to hold that this week. I said it. I want you to hold it this week. And I want you to open your heart up to allow the Spirit of God to guide your peacemaking path and be an answer to someone's prayer. Okay, now don't be lying to the Holy Spirit. You know if you can give both. But truly, if you just go, I just wouldn't have anything, then don't. And look for that opportunity. Tangibly this week, help someone. Every day, every morning, start off with this little simple prayer. Spirit of the living God, open my eyes to see a need that I can meet with this $10, with this $20, with this $100, whatever it might be. that it might be an opportunity to be an answer to someone's prayer. Open my eyes to see that. You say every day. I would almost guarantee you that you'll see the opportunity. I don't want to guarantee, but there's something about intentionality that opens our eyes to see what's happening around us. So hopefully this week you hear that. I hope that you're encouraged to build a generosity plan in your life, to support the things that are of value to you, right? To say, here's how we're going to give, to think about those areas now, need, and next. And then I really do hope that some of you might be interested in helping your church establish this peacemaking endowment fund, right? And if you have any experience with getting those set up and started, and maybe you'd like to help, we can create that. We can start it with $10. And I just believe over the next 20 years, we could grow an endowment that would just help propel the peacemaking work of our church. And so maybe if you're interested in that, you check that box on your Connect card, and we'll reach out and put a little team together, and we'll start thinking about that. And we can set up an opportunity for people to give and leave a legacy, right, for the things that are of value to them. So this song that we're going to sing today, it's called Let Us Be the Church. And I love the line in this song that says, teach us how to love and how to live. Teach us how to show up when no one will. Here's the thing, you can't show up when nobody else will if you're not ready, if you're not thinking about it, if you're not planning, if you've not said, I'm ready for the moment. I've planned for this. I can be present. And then it says, as children of your mercy, may the love of Christ in us be evident. So I think the love of Christ is made manifest in our world when we are generous. Is a tangible expression, and we bring hope, and we bring joy, and we bring healing. I hope that you heard my heart today that this is not about you giving to Crossroads Church. I really do. I mean, I want you to, don't get me wrong. But that's not what this is about. This is about you being empowered to be transformed and to shape the world and to be a blessing and to be an answer to prayer around you by intentionally planning in your life, in your finances. So I'm going to invite those of you that are able to and would like to stand. The table is open for everyone. There's no class you go through here. This is an opportunity to experience the joy and the grace and the love that's found in God. No greater love has this than anyone lay down their life for a friend. And Jesus laid down his life for all of us so that we might know what it looks like to stand against hate and injustice and to return that with love. So the body of Christ broken for you, the blood of Christ shed for you.